What's up, guys? Welcome to the Honest Youth Pastor YouTube channel, the channel that helps believers use biblical discernment in all aspects of life. Now, I want to say before we get into this, I understand that a lot of people won't even know what I'm talking about, like this video at all. It's going to be very niche. If you've not been on Twitter, you probably don't even know what's going on. But I saw enough on Twitter about this that I thought, might as well read the book. Might as well see what's going on. So I bought an audio book and I listened to it, just so everybody knows. I think that should be kind of on the table, cards on the table to begin with. I didn't read the book. I bought the book audiobook, and as I read all of my books, they're all audio. So I actually had to look up, and I'll note this a little bit later as we go through this, that I wasn't sure about like citations, because obviously with an audiobook, you have no clue about citations at all, like what those look like. And so I did look up on Amazon the whole show me your book thing, and I was able to see, I can't see the citation page, but I could see how many citations were used within at least the first chapter. So it kind of gave me an idea about how citations were. Also, excuse me as I take a lot of drinks today during this video, because I don't know what's going on. I think it's allergies. I have no clue. But anyway, so I want to give you the basic rundown of what this video is going to look like, because we're going to be here for a minute. So hopefully you'll stick out the whole time. It's literally just going to be my face. I did not have time to make slides or anything like that. It's just going to be talking. If you have a comment about something I say, I will try to be watching the comments. I'll also be looking over here to my right, because that's where my notes are, because I do have some notes jotted down. So let's start with this for those of you that are completely unfamiliar with what's going on. Megan Basham wrote a book called Shepherds for Sale. Now, Megan Basham, I think I'm saying her name right, I'll just refer to her as Megan, works for the Daily Wire. Before that, I guess she worked for World Magazine or something like that, where she wrote pieces for World Magazine. I guess is a religious organization, religious magazine. And so she wrote this book called Shepherds for Sale. The premise of the book, really quick, and we're going to go chapter by chapter here in a little bit, but the premise of the book is there are shepherds, there are leaders. Actually, I think Christian influencers or Christian leaders are actually, it'd be a better understanding of what she's actually talking about. There are people within Christianity that have influence over the church, and that some of them have led the church astray with different ideologies. And she covers that chapter by chapter, looking at specific, almost in every chapter except chapter 2, I think, uses people that are kind of well known within evangelicalism to use as like figures or examples of the particular issue or topic that she's talking about. So she, somebody just said I have something spelled wrong in the title. Of course I do. I always have something wrong. I'll fix it later. I'm not. If you want to know something that somebody that's never going to write a book, or somebody that did write a book, those poor editors would have to deal with, it's going to be this guy. So, because my spelling and grammar are so terrible. So anyway, there's that. She wrote a book talking about the issues within the church that she feels like there are high profile people that have sort of sold the church out to go kind of liberal or woke, right? Is the term people are using. Now, the idea is that that has upset some people that she named names. Before we get into that, though, I do want to say something. I want to go by my notes here, so there's some sort of structure, because if not, my brain will be all over the place. One of the things that I think, before we get into it, and I think you're going to see this as we get into it, one of the things I think the book demonstrates is just how split the church is. Okay, if you go online, especially Twitter, and look at the sort of the reactions to it, what you're going to see is that basically people fall on one side or the other. Like, it's very clear basically what side you fall on based upon sort of who you follow on Twitter and who you quote tweet and all that. I think you can go look at my quote tweets or my likes and basically see where I fall on it. But my hope is that this is a fairly unbiased review. There's going to be things that I'm going to say here that people that I talk to regularly probably won't like, but I think it's an honest take on it. But I think the book shows that there's a division, like a really bad division. There are people that I know that are like, I don't think there's anybody that is not leaning toward one side or the other, but there are people that are objectively trying to stay in the middle as much as possible. It's sort of hard to do that, but the book demonstrates that. The other thing that you're going to see is it really shows that the church is very, very much like politics in regards to, one, how the divide happens, and two, that it's just funded. Like, and we'll get into this as well. One of the claims of the book that we'll dig a little bit more into, that there are people that are backing particular organizations to push particular messages, and we'll get into that. But all that demonstrates is that the church is just as bad as the world in regards to being able to be bought off. And then lastly, before we get into it, there's also an important understanding that I think one of the understandings we need to get is that most congregants, right, most people that are not chronically online, probably nobody I go to church with, the exception of maybe 5 people, even are going to care about this book, because it's so niche and so particular in regards to who it's actually talking to and who it's talking about. I think the people in the pew aren't going to care so much about it, and I'll get into why here in a little bit, why I think that is. I think really this book is only going to make the people that have some sort of platforms online or that are really loud on either side really mad. They're going to say something. That's the only reason I bought this book, is because I saw Gavin Ortlund like going crazy and people retweeting and attacking and all that. It's like, what is going on in this book? So let's get into that real quick, because I don't think I can talk about the book until I talk about the controversy behind the book. Now, if you don't know, there are plenty of videos. I didn't link any of them below. I will try to remember to do that later. But Gavin Ortlund has an apologetics YouTube channel, and he did a response video to Megan's book because he's mentioned in chapter 1. He did a very long video, actually, and he basically says that she misrepresented him, that the whole first chapter is about him, and that she never contacted him, and like a lot of the facts are wrong, is what he's saying. Now, I'll just say from listening to the book, like, I didn't get that sense at all. Maybe if I actually sat down and looked at it and read it, maybe if I listened to it a few times, maybe I would get that sense. But just listening to the book the first time, chapter 1, like, I was just like, oh, okay, she's using him as an example or a type of people that have said these things, and then quoting him as saying some of these things as an example of people higher up with some influence in evangelicalism having said these things. In fact, the whole book sort of does this. We'll talk about this. I feel like in every chapter, with the exception, I think, of chapter 2, she does this. Like, she'll use people that are well known as examples of people that have said or done things that she feels are compromising, and just sort of puts them out as an example. Now, I don't have an issue with that, and I'll explain why. Because every week when I do a sermon review, it's the same basic idea. Like, I'm putting out here somebody that's preached a sermon, and the idea isn't to bash them or put them down or say they're terrible or great. But I am using them as an example. Like, I could tell you 7,000-8,000 times the same thing about this is what a sermon should look like and include, but unless I give you an example of that person and we walk all the way through it, you're not going to easily be able to pick that up. But if we do that week after week, then you can sort of start picking up some sort of semblance of what I'm talking about. And I think she does a very similar thing with the people she uses in this book. I think she does name them in a more direct way than I would be doing in a sermon review, but at the end of the day, all of them seem to me to be used as sort of just figures, examples, or types. I don't feel like she's really coming after a lot of these people, with the exception of Russell Moore. She really seems like she's got an axe to grind with Russell Moore. But in general, it seems like she's saying, hey, these are the people that have said or done these things, and these are examples of shepherds that have in some way or another compromised on these topics, these specific ones that she uses in the book. And so I think on the Gavin situation, let me just say this before we move on. On the Gavin situation, it was probably just a bad idea. Just from me being on the internet and experiencing sort of the pushback that I get occasionally, it was just a bad idea for Gavin to respond the first time at all. I think I would have, if my understanding is correct on timeline wise, like, he released a video the day her book dropped. And so it just sort of like really, it didn't work in his favor because it really worked. I mean, that's the only reason I bought it. It actually worked to help her get her book more traction. If he just wanted to set anything and done like a short little blog post about it, like correcting the errors and referencing them, I think that would have been way more beneficial. But he didn't do that. He made now 2 videos, which is really just propelled her book further up the charts. So Gavin, I think the second video I watched, actually, he said he wasn't going to make any more. Not that Gavin will ever watch this, but if you do, bro, like, don't make, like, it's not helping you. It's just not. It's just the way the internet works. This isn't helping you. So, let's move on to the chapters. Let's look at the chat real quick before we move on to the chapters. Gavin Ortlund doesn't even believe in Genesis. How on earth can he be an apologist? I don't know. I'll also say this. I know nothing of Gavin Ortlund. I have no clue. I just know he has a channel with 70,000 people that follow him, and the videos that he goes through, he seems like him and I definitely wouldn't agree on things from what I just saw from the titles, but I can't judge the guy on titles of videos. So I don't know. I mean, if that's true, yeah, it's a problem. So, if someone puts you in their book about false teachings, I take it seriously. It's understandable. Lame take. Let them bully you. Otherwise, they will bully you harder. I don't know. Here's the thing. I think one of the things that, I'll say this, I guess, before we get into the book, because that actually brings up a good point. I don't know if this is the point you intended, but this is what we're going to talk about. I think one of the things that people misunderstand, and I'm not saying I'm an expert on it, I have literally dipped my toe in it, so I'm not claiming to be an expert, but I'm telling you as much information as I know about the process. Whenever you write a book, there are edits upon edits upon edits upon edits. Like, full disclosure, I have been approached about possibly writing a book. I think I sent in like 6 different ideas for books. Each of them were turned down. Every reason that was given was because like they didn't feel like it would connect with the Christian audience, because the book needs to connect on some sort of empathetic level with you for you to care about reading it, and be like, none of the things I sent in seemed that way. Also, the idea of like, so it has to connect, right? So her book does that. It connects with the audience she's intending it to. I think the book would have been, and this is maybe giving it away a little too early, but I think this is giving things away a little too early, but the book could have been better if it would have been for a more broad audience. The book, let me see what we're talking about right here. Where is it? I had a note about this. I'm sorry. I'm not, let me see here. So she had a choice, and I think this choice was deliberate. She had a choice to write an evergreen book or a book that was like for right now, like the cultural moment we're in. I think it would have been a better book if it would have been an evergreen book, meaning giving examples of things to look out for throughout, like, no matter what generation you're in. The book is very specifically for here and now, which is like, I think not great, because that means after like this year or next, it won't even be relevant anymore. But that's a choice she made. So let's go ahead and get into the book. Now, these, I just want to let you know from the start, okay, is that what you're going to have in my chapter, just like summaries, are just that. They're the things that I listened to the whole chapter and I said, what's like the very core of this idea? If you read the book and you get into the chapter, there are going to be more specific points that I do not make here, because that wasn't my goal. My goal was to say, what is the general gist of the book? So here it is. The introduction, Megan basically lays out the issues with pastors picking up particular causes while ignoring others. She highlights the apparent drift of well-known evangelical leaders online. We'll talk about the people she names per chapter here in a minute. Then she offers hope in what seems like a very bad situation, juxtaposing bad pastors with good ones. Now, we're going to see this theme throughout. I'll talk about it, but it basically sets up, like, the first chapter is like, hey, there's a lot of problems you don't know about. There's a bunch of doom and gloom. let's talk about what's happening now like it happened back then, basically. And she does reference some past events in which liberals, communists have it sort of integrated into mainline denominations and sort of shifted them in a more liberal direction, all historically provable and accurate. She references that and saying that's happening again. So she sort of sets the stage to say, this happened back then. Now this is happening again, with the idea of we're going to demonstrate that with the people that you know, right? Which is where I say, like, that's where the difference is between, like, when I'm doing a sermon review or a making of a minister. I'm not really necessarily saying this person right here is the cause. I'm saying this is a general idea of what we should be looking for. The book does get a little bit more poignant on these are the particular people. So chapter 1, we've already sort of talked about it, but she uses Gavin Ortlund as the figurehead for promotion of the talking points on climate change and the church. The criticism, I will say this, the criticism of the comments seemed to be fair. However, at the very end of chapter 1, she sort of says, has Gavin read this? Does Gavin know that? Has Gavin been made aware of this? And if he has, why does he teach his congregation this, that, or the other thing? It's a bunch of open-ended questions. What we do know now, right, what I wouldn't have known necessarily just from reading the book and not knowing all the response, is that she clearly didn't reach out to Gavin to verify this was his actual position. That's where I, like, the one thing from chapter 1 that sort of gives credence to the whole Gavin video and all the backlash online is I think this could have really simply been solved by just, like, calling him or sending an email to him. I don't know if he would have responded. There are other chapters we'll talk about in which she did reach out to people, and she says they didn't get back to her. I don't know the timeline on this book, right? Like, as far as when she reached out to write the chapter versus the publishing date and all that. I know those are complicated as well. But the point is that should have at least been a thing that was done. On the making of the ministers that I've done, I know I've known it was a long shot every single time, but I've sent people messages, like the particular ministers or the social media accounts of these ministers, to say, hey, here's this video if you'd like to watch it. The only person that took me up on that was Andy Stanley, and wasn't even the one that reached out. It was one of his campus pastors that did it. And there were a few things that I corrected in that one based on the information they gave me. No one else did. The only person that came close was Isaiah Saldivar, and he saw my message, he didn't reply to my message, and then he just reviewed my video. But the point is, in chapter 1, it's pretty clear she didn't reach out to Gavin at all, which does give credence to his argument. That would have been an easy thing to reach out to. Chapter 2 explores immigration in the church. It explores the funding and the teaching campaigns to turn evangelicals into a voting bloc to push for open borders. Megan's argument here will definitely upset people that are more progressive, but I felt like it was an honest critique. Like, if these things are happening and there are people that are teaching these things, where is the money coming from? Like, who's funding these? And this is a theme that you'll see throughout the book. What you'll see in the book is that there's this idea that there's money coming from somewhere to fund these agendas, ideas, or policies. And if you can, find the money, you'll find sort of the influence of why these agendas, ideas, or policies are being pushed. I don't think she says it in chapter 2, but she does in chapter 3 or 4, talks about George Soros and George Soros money. Now, I will be the first one to tell you that when I heard that, I was like, because every time I've ever heard of George Soros money, it always comes like with a conspiracy theory attached to it. Though, to be frank, it does seem like George Soros has invested quite a bit in a lot of different organizations, but it is kept pretty private and it's hard to track that stuff down. So I'm not saying it's totally illegitimate. Anyway, that's the thing in chapter 2, all about immigration, all about teaching it within the church. Doesn't really name any names. This is the only chapter that there wasn't anybody like flat out named that was a big name that you could pull out. We do make up for that, though, in chapter 3. In chapter 3, she explores abortion in the church, and she names a lot of names. In fact, this is the first two chapters are pretty short. They're not very long at all. Chapter 3 gets exceedingly longer, which it's about abortion, so that makes sense. She names Beth Moore, Russell Moore, David French, Karen Swallow, Pryor, all in regards to this, in regards to the issue. The chapter is really a defense for Trump's war, or defense for Trump against what Maggie considers evangelical elites. Now, what you're going to hear, and this is, if you've read any of the defenses or like the pushback against her book, one of the things you'll probably see in that is the idea that this is very much like a Trump book. Like she mentions Trump a lot. I think I saw somewhere online where somebody counted the number of times. That's not false. She does name Trump a whole bunch of times. Now, I think it's important, and I don't have this information. Again, I just listened to the audiobook, so I have no clue. I don't have this number. But I think that the context of each of those would be very interesting to break down and see, to say, okay, well, how is he mentioned, right? So just because the book mentions Trump doesn't mean that she specifically is like over here defending the man. In fact, sometimes there's going to be, there's actually a number of times where she just read off article titles, like news titles that had his name in it. That was at least a dozen times. And so in those cases, right, yeah, the name Trump was said, but it wasn't like in an affirmative or something like that. It was just her using an example. Now, chapter 3, this chapter becomes clear that the title of the book is a bit misleading. And what I say by that is, like, when I picked up this book, it says Shepherds for Sale. So my assumption was that she was using the term shepherd, the title shepherd, in a way that was as we would use it in the church, right? So a shepherd is somebody that is in a local church shepherding a body of people. But when you start mentioning Beth Moore, Russell Moore, David French, Karen Swallow Pryor, you're not actually talking about like pastors or shepherds. You're talking about like influential people within Christianity for sure, but not shepherds. So there's that. So that's where it really becomes pretty clear that you're like, she's not actually talking about pastors, just pastors. She's very much talking about something else. Guys, give me 1 second. I don't know if you can hear that. My dogs are making some noise. I'll be right back. I apologize. That's how you know it's a live stream, because I have to get up in the middle of it so I can concentrate. All right, so she mentions all three of those people, and this chapter is really about Trump's defense against the evangelical elite. In the chapter, it becomes clear that her title is misleading. Here we go. The people mentioned up to this point are more evangelical influencers than shepherds. The thing that she demonstrates in this chapter is that from 2016 to 2020, you have a big split within the church, not just picking sides, but this is where she just sort of names what everybody also already knows, which is that, like, there's this split between people going super left or super right, and people starting to use definitionally different meanings for words. And so it's one of those things. Where in that case, it's just kind of like, hey, abortion was a big deal. These people didn't say anything, or they defended people that did, and like negative things. So the whole chapter 4 is about abortion, and basically those four people sort of selling out to a more liberal idea of abortion in general. So, okay, somebody says they couldn't hear it. Well, I'm sorry, I could hear it. It was driving me nuts. Chapter 4 talks about Christian mainstream organizations. Chapter 4 is where she mentions like the Gospel Coalition. She mentions Christianity Today. She mentions basically the money behind them. This is where the money really comes in. We haven't really talked a ton about the money and influence that has happened in the church or in the Let's be honest. It's not the church. It's organizations above the church. She hasn't really talked about that up until chapter 4. Whenever we start talking about mainstream organizations, especially Christianity Today, and a little bit about the Gospel Coalition, but it's mainly about Christianity Today. This is also where Russell Moore comes in. I did not realize, I think, the extent of which Russell Moore just led various things. But it's very clear that Russell Moore has his hands in a lot of things. You can say that's good or bad, but it's just very clear that Russell Moore has been in a lot of places in Christianity and or evangelical Christianity. She makes it a big deal here to talk about funding, especially for Christianity Today, coming from outside organizations to affect what they write about. Now, today, as of the recording of this video, like right before I got on, there were a bunch of people retweeting a Christianity Today article about the black church leaders rallying around Kamala. And I read the article, and the article was like mid at best. Like it was just, it's not really even, it wasn't worth reading. It was basically, hey, there's two sides to this. Some like her, some don't, and who knows? And so it wasn't like this big puff piece or a push or anything. It was just stating like the apparent facts. But a lot of people, because they're caught up in this book thing right now and Christianity Today being bought and paid for, were retweeting it about how, look, they're sold, they've gone woke. But if you read the article, like it's a mid article. It's not like this big thing. So it's one of those things where I have no doubt, and I guess this would be a good place to interject this. There are 100%, like I think you know this, but maybe you don't. And let me burst your bubble right now in case you don't. Almost all of the people that you see online that are big, and I'll just put myself in this and just explain what I mean by this in a minute, are in some way, form, or fashion either directly on payroll of an organization that wants them to say or do certain things, or have some sort of monetary influence that makes them at least question what they say or what they don't say. That 100% goes for people at Christianity Today, people at Gospel Coalition, T4G, when that thing used to exist. That goes for Daily Wire. that goes for everything. The Shepherd's Conference, G4, like you can name organizations on either side of the Christian spectrum aisle right now. That goes for all of them. And if you say something that is out of line with what the people in that particular group want you to say, you'll either get crushed or ratioed every time. You may lose your job or you may lose funding. Just to give you an insight, what I mean by like that, I'm at a very low level of that, but to give you an insight, I have a Patreon that people subscribe to that they can get videos early and sermon reviews early or early access to the making of ministers. A long time ago, when the whole John MacArthur kerfuffle was going on, I made a series of videos about John MacArthur. Lost 2-3 Patreons. So for me, like nothing. Like the Patreon money basically just funds the streaming service, the cameras, upgrades to this little area that is in my house. So for me, it was no big deal. It was like, all right, 3 people left because they got mad that I said something about John MacArthur. Who cares? Because I was just critiquing John MacArthur. So they left. Now that's the same thing for like Christianity Today. Christianity Today knows that their funding comes from somewhere. Right? Megan did some research. Apparently it's cited where they get a whole bunch of money, a whole year's of funding from somebody that's very left leaning. So if you don't think that doesn't influence how they write, I think you're just being naive, right? Now, does that mean they went totally woke? I don't know. I don't know any of the people that work there, but to say that the money that is coming into the organization doesn't influence how you write things is silly. Of course it does. That is the same thing that goes for the other side of Christianity as well. There are certain organizations, the Shepherd Conference, G4, whatever organization on the other side of Christianity Today and Gospel Coalition, that also have funding and also have a particular message they want to get out there. Now, I would say one message is far better than the other message and far more helpful, but the reality in Christianity in general is that people are getting paid to say certain things in certain ways. Maybe not outright, but they know the line to walk. There's Christian influencers I know personally that have flat out told me they get paid to do certain reels or respond to certain events. That is just like, that's the icky reality, right? I asked somebody one time, hey, how do I go full time at, doing what I'm doing here? And they walked me through what they do. I sat there for a couple days and prayed about it. And I said, I just can't do that in good conscience. I'll just keep working my job and do this on the side. I can't, do reels and videos about things to get paid for them, to specifically do them. And just so you know, bursting the big bubble in Christianity influencer, like people get paid. So if that happens at like this low level, you better believe what she's talking about in chapter 4 definitely happens at the higher level. It just does. And so when she tracks the money back and says Christianity Today is getting paid and getting funded by these organizations, there's no reason not to believe it. Now, again, I don't have citations for that. Apparently her book does have citations for that, but that's just the reality. Now, again, that goes for every side, not just Christianity Today, but just so we're all aware, that definitely involves Christianity Today. All right, chapter 5. Megan looks at the connection, and this is where she if she hasn't lost you up to this point or hasn't kind of divided the aisle, this is definitely where that's going to happen. Megan looks at the connection to COVID-19 in the church. She breaks down, let me see here. She breaks down these dogs, guys. I don't know if you can hear them. Let me know in the comment section, because if so, I can get rid of it. It's driving me nuts. But if you can't hear it, I'm not going to worry about it. Chapter 5, she breaks down the connection between COVID-19 and the church. She talks about the evangelical elites once again. This entire chapter is about Francis Collins being the church's version of Dr. Fauci. And she says that there was a lot of pastors that got their information from Francis Collins, and Francis Collins was given, a lot of basically like clout or leverage. They have a lot of clout and leverage, he does, by like people like, I think she names Keller. She names a bunch of, a lot of different names that say, hey, they gave Francis Collins this clout in order to say these things about COVID-19 so that your pastors would shut down the church. And so she says, just so you know, like Francis Collins and these pastors that backed him to influence pastors to shut down the churches and wear masks and do all of these things, then, hey, look, they've sold out to the government because they did this, that, or the other thing. Now, she does know, and this is where with the audiobook, it's really hard to tell. I have the audiobook. I can't go into the citations. Maybe somebody has it and they can. So she talks about a bunch of like studies, articles, things that were said at the beginning of COVID that were proven wrong later, that people like Fauci, but more specifically Collins, sort of parroted, which made churches shut down. Basically, chapter 5 is about if your pastor kept your church shut down for a long amount of time, they bought into the propaganda of like Collins and them, and so you better watch out for them, basically. Now, chapter 6, she goes into critical race theory. This is where, and I just want to be really honest, right? This is where I felt like chapter 6, like you can look back at chapters 1 through 5 and be like, okay, this book is sort of coherently building. When I get to chapter 6, I felt like all of these chapters could have just been blog posts, which I know some books already are. Like I'm aware that some books are just like a collection of somebody's work over a long amount of time, rewritten and then pushed out. Like that's just the case, right? You have pastors like Mike Todd or Stephen Furtick. Like you have pastors that like take their sermons and then turn them into book. Essentially, that seems to be what she's done with a bunch of tweets and things. She's done here. So you get to chapter 6, she starts addressing critical race theory in the church. She uses, and this is where I think the book, not only is the book already niche, it gets niche down even more. She uses the SBC and the institutions that are connected to the Southern Baptist Convention as like the examples of this, specifically pointing out J.D. Greear as like the prime example of somebody that was trying to interject critical race theory into the Southern Baptist Convention, as well as like the associated churches. As somebody that has observed the Southern Baptist Convention from outside, like I just watch all of the craziness, I felt like I am really unaware really of what's going on. And this book, like this chapter is going to sound really strange to somebody that's like not like aware of the Southern Baptist Convention. Now, I understand the Southern Baptist Convention is like this huge convention. Like, it involves a lot of people. But I would still go back to the point I made at the beginning of this video. I don't think a lot of people in the pews really care or know about the things that happen in the conventions. For example, I think you know this. If you don't know this, I'm an ordained Wesleyan pastor, and most of the stuff that happens at the convention, I don't know about unless I pursue it and look into it, let alone do any of the congregation really think about it or know about it, unless it's like some big issue like the Methodist church splitting, things like that. But in general, it doesn't even come to us. So, for example, to talk about critical race theory getting or attempted to get interjected into the Southern Baptist Convention is a very niche reference that I don't know if a lot of people are going to get. But she does use them as sort of a figurehead or an example or a type of look what is happening in the higher institutions of evangelical Christianity. Just be warned, J.D. Greer, for example, is an example or a head of this. Now, chapter 6 goes into chapter 7. Chapter 7, again, uses the SBC, but just in a different way. So chapter 6 was all about critical race theory. Chapter 7 is all about like the Me Too movement or sexual abuse. It is worth noting in chapter 6, I want to say this before we move on. She does talk about how race and ethnicity should be discussed in the local church in ways that are biblical. But not in ways that take on critical race theory in order as a lens to view them through. So she does add that at the end of chapter 6, which I thought was sort of helpful. The reason I say that is because when she talks about in chapter 7 sexual abuse and like the Me Too movement, she has a very long portion. In fact, chapter 7 is really long. She talks about how they're working sort of outside of like law enforcement, trying to make a database, but the database, like who observes the database, and is it even like helpful because there's no way to double check it, and all of that. And then she ends chapter 7 talking about how like there are people that have been abused and there are people whose stories need to be believed, but the church doesn't need to take on a secular view of like sexual abuse or the Me Too movement part of it, and then adopt that sort of idealism into the church, because the church has scripture to dictate how we view and deal with sexual abuse. And so her basic point is that in chapter 7, I need to say this here, Megan again uses Russell Moore and J.D. Greer as negative examples of what pastors should be, calling out another number of SB leaders as well, showing how the secular Me Too movement affected the SBC. She specifically uses Rachel Den Hollander as an example of both Moore and Greer bringing in Den Hollander to just really reform the whole system within the SBC, using secular ideas of how to do that, and then benefiting profoundly from all of those ways. Now, again, chapter 7, if you read it, there's a lot more detail there than that. But the idea is that she's saying Russell Moore, J.D. Greer specifically, with Den Hollander, we're trying to bring in a secular idea of how to deal with sexual abuse into the church rather than dealing with it in a biblical way. So there's that. Chapter 8 was the chapter on homosexuality and the church. This one was the one I was most... So we get to this point, and I, just listening to the book, don't know any citations. I can't verify anything. Everything sounds above board. We get to this chapter, and this is the chapter that really sold me that she had done her research and well, without having the citations to look at, and I'll explain why. She uses Rick Warren and Andy Stanley as the examples in this last chapter, in chapter 7. The reason I say that I have a lot of confidence, at least in chapter 8, is because I did an entire video essay on Andy Stanley. Took months researching his background, took a month looking at the Unconditional Conference, digging into that, looking at resources to verify what I was saying. And everything Megan says in chapter 8 lines up exactly with what I found as well by looking through all of the resources online. The one thing that she does go further on than I did in chapter 8, because it wasn't my particular interest, she talks more about Rick Warren as alongside with Andy Stanley. I didn't cover that part of it because it wasn't part of anything I was looking at in Andy Stanley, but everything checks out that way too. So chapter 8 is the one I'm most confident in saying that she got everything right on, because literally everything she's talking about lines up with exactly what I found about Andy Stanley. So it's one of those things that I have a lot of confidence in chapter 8. Now, I want to be really clear. I got all the way to so chapters 1 through 8, right, are basically just covering the big divisive points within American evangelicalism right now. And you get to the end of chapter 8 and you're like, okay, like what, like you've given a lot of terrible things happening. What, like, is there anything good here? Like, is there anything, like, what's the out? This is where I think if a congregant is reading it, somebody that's not chronically online, somebody that doesn't know about the debates that happen on Twitter, somebody that literally just goes to their job, takes care of their family, eats dinner, hangs out, goes to bed, repeat, right? They don't know about any of these things. They could care less about this video. And so I think if they were to read this book, they're going to get to chapter 8 and be like what? Like, there's nothing good. Now, the conclusion that she leaves does sort of rectify that, and I'll explain what I mean by that. The conclusion she gives, she opens up about like her own past, about being raised in the church, in churches that really didn't preach the gospel that well, or didn't like really tell her about her sin that much. Talks about going down some pretty bad paths as far as drug abuse, addiction, being in jail, not believing, her parents praying for her all the time. Like a lot of, she just goes into her testimony in a very short little bit. And then she talks about the importance of people actually preaching the gospel, because when she started hearing the gospel and not just like the softened, easy part of it, it's when God grabbed a hold of her and changed her life. And so like she ends the book on like the reason that it's important to actually talk about these things in biblical ways is because if we don't, then people will be looking, they'll come into churches and find no real answer different than they found outside with just a little bit of Jesus sprinkled on. And so the conclusion of this book gave me a lot of hope, because I was like, all right, well, at least you gave us a little bit to grab onto with her testimony. Now, the one thing I wasn't thrilled about is that basically her answer for look at all of these issues in the church is find a Bible preaching one. Like, find one that preaches the gospel. The issue I have with ending a book like that is that, you know, you're say whatever you want, but Russell Moore, J.D. Greer, Gavin Ortlund, these other people she mentions in the book are all going to claim that they preach the gospel. And so what we're left with here is like, all right, so the people you named are the bad people, and the people connected to them are the bad people. And so I just look for people that are not them. And this is where I say that at the beginning of this video, I said, like, I think it would have been better. It would have been an evergreen book, like an ever useful one that you could pick up no matter what point in time you're in. And, you know, this year, next year, the next one. It would have been helpful if the book was laid out and said, hey, here are the issues, right? I mean, she is right to cover issues like abortion, immigration, mainline Christian media, CRT, sexual assault and abuse, homosexuality. Like, she's right to cover all of those things, because those are issues in the church that need to be talked about in a biblical way so that we can live rightly as believers. But we're not given in the book any real substantive thing to grab onto other than, like, believe the gospel, but not from these people. And so it leaves you really sort of like depressed when you get to the end of it. I mean, you feel like you've just been on Twitter all day because you're just like, look at all of this terribleness that's happening in the church. What redemptive, is there anything redemptive in it? If like you get to the end and go, if everybody is bought off by money, if the institutions above me, as far as the colleges and like the Southern Baptist Convention, and if all of these things are happening, then like what hope is there? You're essentially walking like this book, and this is like, again, this is I only listened through it once. I took notes. This is my first take on it, is that I feel like Megan walks into the evangelical church, pulls the fire alarm, and goes, the building's on fire, don't believe these guys, and then leaves. And so you're left in a place where you're like, okay, the whole thing's burning down. I can't trust these guys. Where's the door, I guess? I mean, that's really what you're left. There's no good firemen coming to save the burning building. It's just like these dudes have completely corrupted everything, and I guess the whole thing's burning to the ground. And so it's very dystopian in its take. And so there's that, right? My other critique of the book, aside from the fact that it's dystopian, is that it is very biased in its approach to the topics it speaks about. So what I mean by that is that, like, so when we're talking about in chapter, where's it at, guys? Chapter 4, when we're talking about Christian organizations and Christian media. As I've already said, it's just a flat out reality. You cannot believe me if you don't want to. It's just reality that Christian influencers or Christian influential people all have their paycheck come from somewhere, right? And when they do have their paycheck come from somewhere, unless somebody has an incredibly high morals, they are going to skew those one way or the other based upon getting paid. I'm just telling you. I have worked for my entire adult life. I have worked in the corporate sphere. I have been in middle management. I have been in top management. I have been in sales. I have been doing HR stuff. Like, here's the thing. I have seen a number of people and had to experience myself and course correct people being influenced and their entire personalities changing based on a paycheck. I say that as somebody that not more than probably 12, 15 years ago was kind of on that track myself until I just saw that was happening and had to course correct. If you offer somebody enough money, they will reason within their brain a reason to go a particular way. And so the fact is that when she talks about Christian organizations being funded or paid off, that's just true. But she doesn't talk about how that's true across the board. She talks about how that's true for Christianity Today and the Gospel Coalition, but she doesn't talk about how that's true for everybody. And so it's one of those things where, and you'll see this, if somebody gets out of line in any little camp, they get kicked out of that camp. I'll say this just as an example. I am not Reformed enough for the Reformed people, and I am not Arminian enough for the Arminians. And so I just sort of hang out in this limbo space where I'm just kind of like, because this isn't my job, I can just say whatever I want and then sort of correct based upon biblical correction. There's a lot of people like that. I'm just saying that people that are in organizations are influenced by the money on both sides. That's true for the whole book. And so one of the things that I think is worth saying here is that on the book, do I think she's lying? Right? That's the whole title of the video. Do I think she is lying? I don't think she's lying. From what I saw on Amazon, in chapter 1 alone, there were like 52 citations, and there's 9 chapters. All of those, I mean, that means that let's just say 50 citations per chapter. She's got plenty of citations to cite the things she's talking about. Now, the real question is, are those citations valid? She seems online to be backing up those citations. I think it'll take a long time for somebody to fact check all of them. I think it is important to include them. The reason on the Making of a Minister videos that I do that I include all the videos I've watched is because I want you to be able to go click on the link to see the full context of what's going on. I hope she did the same. I can't speak to that. I had the audio version. So I don't think she's lying about anything she's saying. I just think she's very one-sided about everything she's saying. So where you may have, and let me explain what I mean by that. Where you have like a Gavin Ortlund, for example, pushing or not pushing, I don't know. We're just going to go with the assumption that he is leaning very heavily toward like a climate change sort of narrative that he wants to teach his people. On the other side, you have his opposite within like the more, what would be considered like conservative Christian field. You have his opposite. And so the idea is that for every chapter you have the same. So if chapter 3, when we're talking about abortion, you may name Beth Moore, Russell Moore, and David French, but on the other side, you have the abolitionists, right, that are pushing their message. By the way, I'm an abolitionist. You have the counter for both. And so I think somebody from, like, they'll just say Russell Moore's camp, right, could easily write the exact same book, only just using different names. It would be really easy to do. And this is where I think, is this book helpful? That's a really hard answer. Because the reality is, I think people do need to know that things like this are taking place in the upper echelons of like the Christian world. You do need to know that Christianity today has its funding come from people that are not Christians. You need to know that. You need to know that there are people that call themselves Christians that are pushing for or opposing anti-abortion bills. Like, you need to know that. You need to be informed that these things are happening. That there's literal like Sunday school curriculum that is being made and funded to change the way the people in the pews think. Like, you need to know that. But I don't think it's all doom and gloom. That's my point. I think as a local church pastor, my job is to open up the scriptures and teach them. And in so teaching them, help the people be able to discern through the scripture like how to deal with all of these issues, right? I mean, the fact that some people don't know that Beth Moore is a little like left of center is weird. That you don't like that there's people in the pews that don't know that. It's a little weird that people don't know that Catherine Swallow Prior like is very left of center. And so it's those things where I don't know. And this is maybe where the book would have been less like hard hitting, but a lot more long lasting if we would have said like, these are the type of people that you look for. In chapter 9, or not chapter 9, in her conclusion, she quotes J. Gresham Machen in his book. And his book is really good. His book is the type of book I'm talking about. Like, if you read Christianity and Liberalism today, you will see that it is just as true then as it was then. She also quotes Jude about people that have snuck in. I think that's the book that would have been more helpful to say like, hey, these are the issues we're looking for. Here is the scripture to demonstrate why Christians don't or shouldn't think this way, and give people the tools in order to help them discern with a biblical lens how to address these things. You could have done that on immigration. You could have done that on climate. You could have done that on abortion. You could have done that on just influences, philosophies. You could have done that on sickness. You could have done that on ethnicity, and you could have done that on sexual abuse and ethics. You could have done that on LGBTQ. Like, you could have done all of that in a different way than we did. Now, the book wouldn't have hit as hard and wouldn't have sold so many copies. And I don't know if that was her intent. Again, as I've already mentioned in this video, I dipped my big toe in publishing and writing a book. And I can tell you, unless you have an idea that is going to appeal to the masses and can guarantee some sales, they're just not going to even pursue it. And so the fact that I believe this is her first book, it did that, and it did that in a very niche way. She'll definitely have a second book. But what that book will be about and if it's helpful is yet to be seen. So here's my last word. You waited 55 minutes to hear this. Did she lie? I don't think she lied. I think she could have done a whole lot better in citing her resources, just from what I've heard online. Again, I haven't looked at them. I think she could have done a lot better job communicating the ideas she's addressing without calling out the people, but calling out the people seems to have been the point. And I think that in general, it's a helpful book, but not for everybody. I think it is a helpful book for mature believers that want to be more discerning about the Christian environment and the Christian moment they're in. That will help you, but you're going to have to be really balanced in how you approach it. Because if you're not, then you're going to come away thinking the whole building is burning down. And there's going to be people, let me just say this now. There are going to be people that watch this that say the whole building is burning down. And, we need to get the extinguishers and we need to get these people out of here. Like pause, bro. Like if you have read any bit of Christian history, you know that the church has always been in this state. There are always people that are preaching false doctrine, and there are always people that are standing firm on the scriptures, pushing back against it. And so this book is helpful for pastors. I think it's going to black pill congregants and make them depressed and have no real clue who to look for, who to trust, where to go. I think it would be a real good course if somebody just follows the path all the way down straight to deconstruction, because as far as you get to the end of this book, the whole thing is burning down. I think it's helpful for a very select amount of people, for a very mature believer in a very particular situation. That's at its best. At its worst, I think it's going to turn people against other people in such a strong way that they won't actually know why they're against these people. They're just going to be against them because somebody told them to be. And that's not a good way to reason through things. I don't think that's Megan's intent. I truly don't think her intent is to turn everybody that reads her book against Russell Moore. If it is, that's a bad intent. But I think that is the implication that people will come away with, is they'll get done with the book and go, I don't like J.D. Greer, I don't like Russell Moore, I don't like Beth Moore, I don't like Francis Collins, like all these people are terrible, but they won't be able to tell you why they're terrible, other than to tell you that you need to go read Basham's book. And that's not helpful. Because at that point, you're telling people what to think, not how to think, which I think would have been better. So altogether, no, I would not suggest that just anybody read this. I do think it's helpful for some people. If you're unaware of what is happening within the upper Christian echelons, it's a good book, but you're going to have to come with a heavy dose of Jesus is in control of all things and be in your Bible a lot to come away not depressed by this. All right, so there's that. If you found that helpful, leave a like. I'm going to go to the comment section here, read through some of these comments, see if we can find anything here as I was yapping along. Let me see here. Scott says, the social justice movement can go to the opposite extremes as well. Don't deity an issue over Christ. I'm not sure exactly what that means. We're going to keep moving on. Let me see here. Yeah, I'm a non-denominational, and we went through 1st and 2nd Timothy and Titus last fall and through the last edition of Experiencing God in the Spring. I don't even know what that was replied to. Okay, I'm trying to find stuff, guys. Let me see this real quick. I was talking about Bible studies and stuff. This from Christina says, the bad experiences of women's Bible studies led me to learn how to study my Bible on my own. To be honest, I would really love to join a real Bible study. That's the thing. I will make a comment about that. She mentions that when we're talking about immigration specifically, she was talking about I forget what organization, but organizations funding Bible studies that was going to twist scripture in order to lead large swaths of evangelicals to understand immigration in an unbiblical way, but they would believe it because it was coming from a biblical publisher. One of the things I think, and I've said this before, I'll just say it again, I think one of the best ways to combat any of these issues, whether it be somebody funding a bad Bible study, whether it be articles coming from Christianity Today or other places, like the best way, the best defense against false teaching is really simple: biblical literacy. If I can disciple a new believer in how to read the Bible, what we're looking for, right? Just basic exegetical tools, basic hermeneutics, that is going to do more to combat bad teaching and like all of the things she talks about than anything else. If you learned how to read your Bible in a traditional Christian way, I'm talking about like how Christians have done it forever. You're going to hear people like, well, there's not a traditional Christian way of it. Yes, there is. Yes, there is. You can study it. It's evident. You can find it. It's morphed a little bit throughout time. You're going to have some bumps. It's not super clear and easy, but you can learn it. It is there. And when you do, you're able to see when somebody's twisting scripture and deal with it. What else we got here? This is about Ortlund. Ortlund, though I would agree with what he said in his videos about misrepresentation of the book, he encouraged research and engagement on it. Yeah, so I'll just say this. Anytime, again, I don't want to get in the middle of the Ortlund thing. It seems apparent that she didn't reach out to him. That was definitely a bad move on her part. Everybody she mentioned, she should have at least reached out to confirm. That's just simple. Now, would they have gotten back to her? Probably not. I think she said she did reach out to Christianity Today, maybe Gospel Coalition for comment. They didn't get back. Those are the only times I remember her stating that she tried to reach out to somebody. I'm sure there was more. That's the only ones I remember. LOL, I'm one of those people who thinks it's all burning down. I think it might be more so the internet making it so clear that it makes it hurt. Yes, that is a great point. Can I put that up there? Okay, you guys probably can't read that. I'll just leave it there in case you can, though. Here's the thing on this comment. I think this is 100% true. If you get offline for 4 days, like, go be involved in your local church. Like, just talk to other Christians. Just, go to work and evangelize and do the work of a believer, right? Just produce good works. Talk about Jesus. These types of conversations go away real fast. Like, it's all burning down stress goes away. I'll tell you that right now, 100%. When I'm at church, right, tomorrow, and I'm talking with one of my good friends, Joe, about like the Bible and Jesus and the work that God is doing in the lives of people that we know, the last thing I'm thinking about is Megan Basham's book or Russell Moore, like puppeteering things. It doesn't, because in the local church, that's just why I said at the beginning, the person in the pew doesn't care about these conversations. They don't know about these conversations. And honestly, it is a disservice to them as if I have, as a pastor, get up in front of them and are like, did you know about the cabal? Like, it's not helpful, right? My job is to be knowledgeable of it and then preach in such a way that whenever they come in contact with it, they're able to actually understand it, comprehend it, and work through it. Yeah, if you get off the internet for 4 minutes and go touch grass, as the kids say, a lot of your stress will go away. It really will. It's not as bad as it looks. Beautiful Bursic, I think, says this book is going to make the far-right Christian groups to lean more into their echo chambers. This is the Daily Wire model. I would agree with that up to a point. I'll say this. I would agree with that in as much as I would agree that the left does the same thing. So I tweeted out when I talk about Christianity Today in chapter 4 and a lot of people quote tweeting an article from Christianity Today. One of the things I said in that tweet was it's really hard to be on the same side as some of you guys because it's apparent you don't read some of this stuff. So just to be clear, I would probably align with Megan theologically on probably everything. Or most of everything. I mean, obviously not everything. I would very closely align with her probably theologically as far as I can tell. Never talked to her, but my guess would be I would. That being said, I don't think this book was the best move because I think it is going to chamber people in unhelpful ways. There are times where you gather together in groups that are theologically alike in order to fight like bad doctrine and bad theology. That can go bad really fast. I'll just use J. Gresham Machen again. When he writes about the ideas of the people that he is theologically opposed to. Now, I think he does name some names, but the idea is that like he's saying their argument is this, and this is where their argument is faulty. So even in that regard, he is saying, hey, this person is wrong, but this is how they're wrong. We don't see that in this book. And so I think the far left does this, the far right does this. Like it's just easier to be surrounded by people that you agree with and you like. It's not helpful though. It is not ultimately helpful because if you say, hey, this thing's dumb and everybody around you tells you the same thing, you're not forced to critically think about it. I purposely have people in my life that I don't agree with at all so that I have to think about these things. Now, sometimes we come away and I'm still totally in disagreement with them, but I have at least had to think through the process. And again, I appreciate what she's done here. I don't think it's ultimately as helpful as it could have been. I think it's important and it's useful. I just think that it's not as helpful as it could have been. Hopefully that's clear. Debbie says, she said lack of critical thinking. I'm not sure what she's referring to because now I'm so far down the line of comments. Let me go to the bottom. New Christians more than any other need to see where the heretical threat is. You're right, though. The best defense against counterfeit is clarity. Yeah. So here's the thing. That's true. There are a lot of new Christians, but here's the thing. This is where the local church comes into play. So new believers, and I've seen this happen a few times, just at a far online, new believers will get online and then start searching about like, what is Christianity? What does it mean? Where do I go? Like, who do I believe? They quickly find that there are a lot of different opinions. And so sometimes that will shoot them into Catholicism. I'll be frank with you. Sometimes they'll look at Protestantism and go, this is a mess, and they'll just go Catholic. Other times they typically will go more charismatic because of the excitement, the fervor. So they'll go over there because they're looking for something real and tangible, and they're not really thinking theological very much. So they'll usually go charismatic first. If they don't go Catholic, they'll go charismatic first. And then typically after charismatic, a few years in charismania, some, not all, but a good portion will come more over to a, usually like an evangelical, like mega church, or directly to a more Baptist Reformed leaning church. Some of them will jump from charismatia right to Reformed Baptist, because the longer you're a believer and the longer you're in the Bible, the more you really start thinking theologically. All of that to say this: the new believers do need to know what is fake and what is real, which is where I think it falls upon the pastors and more mature believers. We see this in Titus 2, teaching younger believers within the local church the things of Scripture. And that's where it goes back to the best defense against this sort of nonsense that she brings up in the book, that is literal nonsense. Like, it does need to be pushed against. The best defense for that is biblical literacy and knowing how to read the Bible, for every new believer. What else do we have here? He breaks down the process of Bible translate. Oh, I'm sorry. She must be answering a question from somebody else. Yeah. So there's that, guys. I'll wait a few minutes if there's anybody else in here who wants to comment on what has been said. It's really hard reading these comments because I don't know who's talking to who here. Just to sum up again, in case you're just showing up while I wait for these comments and before we end the stream, the general gist is this. I think Megan's intent is right. The reality is people do need to call out false teachings, false doctrine, show where like the influence of that is coming from, which is clearly outside of the church, funded sometimes by organizations that are clearly not Christian. And that needs to be pointed out. I think she does that well. I think what fails to happen in this book is the reality that that is on both sides of the aisle to some extent. I would argue she is right that it's worse on the more liberal side of Christianity of being kind of bought. That could be my bias as well, but that seems pretty apparent. What this book fails to do, though, that I really wish it would have done, is give more practical steps in how to individually lean into the scripture to push against this, as well as how to, like, more of a end on more of a hopeful note of like, this is what I need to look for in a biblical leader, using the Bible to point that out as far as like qualifications and like fruits of the Spirit and stuff like that. She doesn't do that. Question, unrelated, but is it ever okay to read the NLT? Bible translations in general are pretty good. The only ones I wouldn't recommend for Bible study at all are going to be the Passion Translation or the Message. Just neither are going to be. The Passion Translation is worse. You should just get rid of that. The Message isn't helpful. But in general, I usually try to have 3 open beside me, because here, let me just say, go find Wes Huff on Instagram, or on the internet. Just search Wes Huff, WESFUFF, and HFU. Wes Huff. You can spell it. Find him. He does a lot on Bible translations. That is really, really helpful. Okay. So I'll say this, because I think Debbie's comment here very much sort of antithesizes what's happening right now. Christianity, especially online, can be incredibly exhausting. If you're online enough, you are going to get so depressed that you're not going to know if there's any hope for the church at all. Even books like this, that the intention is to point out the bad apples in order to say, hey, there is, like, this is what's happening, still sort of push you into a negative mindset, which isn't always bad. Sometimes you need to know the house is on fire, but you also need to know how to put that fire out. And let me just say this, and this is my 2 cents before I get off here. Christ is Lord. Read Colossians chapter 1. Everything was made by him. Everything goes back to him. He gets the glory for everything. And in light of that, Paul tells Titus, we are supposed to live our lives producing good works that have been brought, that are from the Spirit's work in us, in a world that is very, very dark. And so the truth is, there's going to be bad. There always has been bad. And if you read the New Testament, you see that there is always bad trying to infiltrate the church. There is always false doctrine, false teachers, and negative things trying to get in to corrupt the gospel. This is not new. But how do the gospel writers and the New Testament writers say to deal with this? Preach Christ, him crucified, about the life change that he brings in a life, to where now we have renewed minds. We are renewed. We were once dead. Now we're alive. Go live in light of that. And when you start doing that, and you start diving into the scriptures, I'll just frankly tell you, and here are my cards, just in case you want to see them, right? My cards are this, that if you start reading the Bible, what you're going to find out really quick is how to deal with the planet God has given us in a right and righteous way, how to care for it. You're going to see how to rightly read the scripture on how do we deal with immigration. You're going to read the scriptures and see how do we treat the unborn. You're going to see how we deal with outside influences or even influences within the church that are talking about different philosophies and different ideas. Like, what do we do with that? You're going to see how to deal with the government and the government oversight. You're going to see how to deal with ethnicity and abuse and different, disoriented passions as far as sexually. All of these things God has given us in the scriptures. And there is a way to read them rightly. And we are so blessed to have centuries of writing of people that have dealt with these same topics, that have wrote about it. And now we have the experience of looking back to see what they did well and what they did poorly, and to hopefully learn from that and do better going forward in the power of the Spirit in our lives. So yes, it's like it can get really dark and it can get really bad, and you can feel like the whole thing's burning down, and there is no lack of people that are more than happy to come alongside you and go, yeah, it's good, the whole thing's burning down. And you can wake up every day wondering, oh, what's going to happen to the church? Look, God's bride, Christ's bride is fine. Are there times and places like now that we need to push back again against false doctrine? Yes. Yes, there is. But she will continue on somewhere in the world because God is not going to abandon her. And there's always hope in that. So get your nose in the Bible, spend your time praying, and pursue Christ. And then when needed, read books like this, find what is helpful in them, and discard what's not. But don't let this be your plumb line. Yes, I think it is helpful. Yes, it does address issues that need to be addressed. Is it the end-all be-all? No. I don't think she's claiming it is either. But don't get so black-pilled on it that you just can't get up tomorrow and witness to somebody because the whole church is burning down. Read the scriptures, see what is right, and go do that in the power of Jesus' name. Guys, hopefully that was helpful. I guess we'll find out in the comments later. If you found it helpful, share it with somebody. If you liked it, make sure you leave a like. That obviously helps the algorithm. And I'm assuming you're subscribed, but if you're not, go ahead and do that. We do sermon reviews every week. Occasionally we do Making of a Ministers. And every Wednesday, me and my friend Rob release a Babbling Pastor podcast where we talk about a variety of different things. Hopefully you'll like that too. I'll talk to you later.